Famously, during the campaign, Donald J. Trump said, "The gays love me." Well, his administration would seem to say not so much. Just how anti-gay is the current administration? We ask Kate Kendell, Executive Director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Welcome back, Kate.
So happy to be here, David.
You know, we've been doing this show for 9 years, 320 shows, and a couple years ago when we got quote-unquote gay marriage, I thought, is there a need for this show anymore? Well, this administration seems to say that there's a need for this show, there's a need for all of us to fight. Just how bad is this administration for our community?
It's as terrible as anything we've seen at the level of federal government in my lifetime. I think the only thing that comes close would be during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. I mean, you had an administration then under Ronald Reagan that not only did nothing in terms of research to try to stem the carnage of so many men dying, but Larry Speaks' press secretary actually laughed during a press conference.
Made fun of people with AIDS.
Mocked the idea that the government should even care. So we've definitely seen the government be completely complicit in ignoring our community and obviously complicit in the deaths of many in our community. But I would have thought we were past a time where an administration would target the most vulnerable in our community and go after them. And this is obviously, I'm talking about the transgender youth and what the executive order regarding Title IX.
Right. I mean, you were here barely a month ago talking about how bad we thought the administration was going to be.
Yep.
And, you know, since there's a lag time between our taping and our air date, it's almost as if anything we say about the Trump administration is old by the time he tweets the next morning. I mean, what could be the political benefit of his anti-transgender policy and pushing this?
Well, it's interesting. I think, you know, I've thought this about Trump on a number of occasions. I'm not sure that in his heart of hearts he's actively anti-trans. I think in some ways it's worse than that. He doesn't care. He actually has no moral center around almost anything that he's doing. It's all for political expediency. It's all for show. But what he's done is he's laden his cabinet with some of the most anti-LGBT figures in the nation, including, top of that list,
his
the
Vice
Attorney
President.
General.
Oh, well, the Attorney General.
Yes, but in terms of people who are executing policy, you put together Mike Pence and you put him with Attorney General Jeff Sessions. That is a duo of the deepest level of homophobia and anti-LGBT fervor. And clearly, it's absolutely clear to us that Jeff Sessions and Mike Pence drove this executive order to withdraw the guidance that protected transgender students in schools, and that this was entirely their agenda. And at least the New York Times reports that Betsy DeVos, head of education, didn't want the guidance to be withdrawn, but she was told to stand down, and Jeff Sessions and Mike Pence got their way.
So what do you say about that? I mean, that was the question I was going to ask you. When you know, after weeks of saying Betsy DeVos is the worst possible person we could put in the Department of Education as its head, we find out that supposedly she's standing up against this, but was overruled. What do you say about that? And what does that say about her leading a department where she's undercut immediately?
Yeah, well, that's maybe the more important question. I think at her core, Betsy DeVos is an empathic and compassionate human being. And she understands, it seems, that transgender students are targeted for ill treatment over and over again, suffer rampant discrimination and harassment and bullying at school, and she feels like this guidance is a very modest way to make sure that schools understand Title IX protects trans students to be able to use facilities consistent with their gender identity. Why upset things? School districts are already doing this, many, a dozen of them at least, with no incident whatsoever. I think the reason I still would stand by a statement that she is the most unqualified person to ever head the Department of Education, because she's never had any interaction with public schools, and in fact has an agenda to dismantle public schools through use of vouchers and other schools other ways of educating students that don't involve public schools. So I do think she's certainly a threat to everything the Department of Education is supposed to stand for. But the good news is she's not as anti-gay, perhaps, as we thought. But she's now been told on the very first issue, which is truly her purview.
Correct.
that her opinion matters less than Jeff Sessions and Mike Pence.
Do you think he'd have said that to a man? I mean, it's a hypothetical.
It's an interesting
but
question. I mean, I think you can say with at least a fair amount of confidence that he values her opinion less because she is female.
Do you think it is fair for activists, and I count myself as that, I've just kind of taken off the gloves. I feel like, on a personal level, I'm speaking for me, every day I have to do something to call attention to what this administration is doing. That's what I can do in a small way. Is it fair for us to take on Ivanka and fair for us to take on Jared? Because the perception to me is that there is this purposeful strategy of saying, well, you see, come on, my daughter and son-in-law, they got gay friends, blah, blah, blah. Let's be nice to the gays. It seems very insulting to me. Is it fair to take them on?
I think it's fair to take on the policies of this administration across the board, whether it's the executive order on transgender students, whether it's the Muslim ban, whether it's the toxic anti-immigrant stuff that he is spewing out. I think it is fair to take this administration on and not allow them to deflect based on throwing up somebody who might be somewhat friendly or ridiculous tweets that mean nothing in terms of the policy world. It is clear that our president is a master of deflection and incapable of taking personal responsibility or taking in critiques or criticism and making course corrections, even if they might be in the best interest of the country.
Right. What do you say to people who say, oh, the constant tweeting and the stuff he does, like saying, I'm not going to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, these are purposeful on Donald Trump's part to deflect from things like the Russia investigation and other policy things that may not fly with the great majority of the American public. Is it purposeful, or is he really just a complete dolt?
I think to say that it's purposeful gives him a little bit too much credit. I think he has zero impulse control, and so he tweets, but I think it has the effect of deflecting. And so I think that ancillary benefit is something he understands. I don't think he tweets for the purpose of saying, okay, I'm going to put out this tweet, everyone will pay attention to that, and no one will see the massive untangling that I've done of our democracy, or no one will be able to see these borderline treasonous activities of me and call them for what they are. I don't think he goes through that kind of thought process, but I do think probably the people around him, they're not taking his phone away because they recognize that his tweeting has the purpose of deflection. And I do think there are people in his administration much more calculating and venal than he is.
Steve Bannon, was that the calculating and venal person
He would be the top of my list, yeah.
What about Steve Bannon, my old hometown boy from Richmond, Virginia?
Yeah, yeah. It's too bad you couldn't have had some influence on your hometown boy, because I do think he is a despicable figure, and the opinions and views that he has about women, about LGBT people, about immigrants, about this country's role in the world. My favorite first line of my favorite Martin Luther King quote is, "Power without love is reckless and abusive." Steve Bannon, to me, is power without love personified. And when you put that into someone and you give them power, this is what they do. And it's repellent what he has been able to orchestrate. And I think it's, 35 days? We've barely seen the tip of the iceberg.
Right. When you were here a month ago, you were talking about your concern that those most vulnerable members of the LGBT community, and you specifically talked about transgender students, would be targeted. Did you think it'd be this bad?
When I said that, I was worried about this guidance being withdrawn. And so, yes, I guess I thought it would be this bad. I suppose when it actually happened, though, living with the reality of it, you essentially have transgender young people, the most vulnerable part of our community, being told by their government, you do not matter. We do not care about you. That is abhorrent. And the reality of feeling that sink in, and know transgender young people who are calling our office and their parents calling our office saying, how do I comfort my kid? You know, she's been crying all night. She doesn't want to go to school now. I mean, it just, you get calls like that and you think, it is a monster that would do something like this.
Have you cried about it?
I have. I mean, now look, I feel like, my crying is more self-indulgent because I'm not the person who has to go to school the next day and worry about whether I'm going to be able to use facilities. I think anyone who has a sense of empathy or a heart would shed tears over the idea that young people now feel like their government is actively their enemy. There's just no way to justify
and
that.
In that sense, it is different from the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration, I mean, one, you would think that 30 years on would be a little bit more educated and socialized, but the Reagan administration always pretended that they were doing the right thing. This administration, to quote my husband, just seems mean.
Yeah, they do seem mean. I mean, in some ways, Reagan's meanness was grounded in neglect. This administration's meanness is grounded in active bullying, active targeting, active destabilizing, active dehumanizing of whole swaths of who we call our neighbors and friends in this country. And it's just, yeah, we're in for a really rough ride. And it does mean, to your point, every day you can do something. Somebody can do something. I don't care whether it's social media, letters to the editor, letters to Congress, phone calls to your senators, donations to organizations fighting back and doing this work. Everybody, every day, can do something.
Great. In our next half, we're going to talk with Kate more about what we can do, also find out how Kate came to this work personally, and about an upcoming anniversary, 40 years for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. We'll be right back with Kate Kendell. And we're back with our continuing conversation with Kate Kendell, Executive Director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, on the Trump administration and its impact on the LGBT community and beyond. But Kate, for some of our viewers who might not know your history, in a nutshell, how did you come to this work? How did you become the single most powerful dyke attorney in the country? Come on, people want to know.
Oh my God, okay, that's quite a title. Well,
you can put it on a card.
So, yeah, exactly. I like that. I might steal that. Grew up Mormon in Utah. Had an amazing current events teacher when I was in 8th grade, Mrs. Lynn Miller, who opened up a whole new world for me. We read Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Chief Joseph, Cesar Chavez, and I remember being so struck by the idea that, wait, you mean you could actually go out and do things in the world? Like, that really stoked this thirst to want to just, I don't know, level up. I was the first to go to college in my family. My parents were very loving, and my dad not particularly supportive of a continuing education. He felt like I was just going to be a professional student, so I had to kind of overcome that. I had to put myself through school. But you know what? I feel like coming to this work after I was at a firm, and then I was at the ACLU in Utah, and then saw a job opening. My wife, actually, Sandy, faxed me at the time a job opening for legal director at NCLR. And I applied, got the job, and then 2 years later became executive director. And, I look back on it, and it's kind of an improbable path. It's not that I was, born in any way with the kind of privilege and advantages, although, obviously, white, in a middle-class neighborhood, going to good schools. All of that just conspired in my favor to put me in a position where I was able to take advantage of tremendous opportunities. And now, almost 21 years as executive director of NCLR, it has been the privilege of my life. I cannot imagine a more rich and rewarding career than the one I've had.
You talked about the last time you were here about the importance of the Women's March, and you used the same word. You said it was a privilege to have been there.
Oh, gosh,
How do we keep the momentum of that? And on March 8th, we have another one called for. I'm a little worried that it won't be as effective. I mean, do we keep doing this, and how long do we keep doing it?
You know, I do think, I mean, I've seen this critique a lot about, well, it can't just be one-off protests. What are we doing? Where does this all go? How do we harness this energy? And then this may not be as big as the last ones were. I mean, they were the day right after the inauguration. But I do feel like those marches, and being in D.C., where it was clearly over 1 million people, there's no doubt in my mind, it made people feel like there were others who felt the same way they did. And that is such an important fuel for feeling like you can make a difference when you don't feel like you're railing against this big monolithic force that you can't make any inroads to. And I think a lot of people have turned that activism into blogging, writing letters, sending checks to organizations, getting involved with organizations. The level of activism and involvement and commitment to resistance is unlike anything I've ever seen. And I think March 8th will build on that. And there'll be other strands that will go out and figure out ways to respond. I really do feel like this is a moment where the more the better. And whatever people can do and however people can engage and whatever means they want to resist, everybody can resist in some way the worst that this administration might have planned and in store. And then the final thing I'll say about it is just recently in the last few days, I've been hearing from people, and I'm going to put this strategy in place myself, writing a letter to every Latino family in your neighborhood. And look, the letter has to begin with, I have no idea what your documented status is.
Yeah.
I have no idea if you're all in fear of ICE showing up. But if you do have those fears, here's how you reach me. Here are people that I know who do this work. You want to switch houses for a weekend if you're afraid of raids. You want somebody to pick up your kids because a parent gets picked up. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. And we so don't do that in San Francisco.
No, but I mean, hearing that, I mean, it's wonderful. I'm almost tearing up, but this is the sort of stuff that now I read in history books about what people were doing in Warsaw before the ghetto gates closed.
Create our own underground railroad.
I mean,
exactly.
You said it last time, and I talked about it in an editorial, that you call the Trump administration an existential threat to our democracy. I want to see if you still believe that, believe it more, and what do you mean by that? I mean, are we really facing a possible, we've had Republican leaders call it a possible dictatorship.
I think it's borderline that. I think we've always been a fragile democracy, right? We've always been a democracy that...
But we didn't think we were.
We get some, well, and that's true. I feel like, viewed objectively, we get some things right, and then we often get some things wrong. We're an experiment in democracy. We're still trying to perfect it. So if you just say we're a working democracy, or we were a functional democracy, I'll give you that. Now, I feel like we are an imperiled democracy. And what you read more and more happening is that you will have Trump and the administration, and then you'll have the dark government of the generals and the people, the leaders in Congress. They're the ones who are really going to make sure things run. Financial leaders, people who are totally unaccountable, because they feel like they have to create a shadow government to keep things operating because this government is so dysfunctional.
So is the shadow government on our side or not?
I think the shadow government is agnostic as to LGBT people. I think the shadow government is more interested in keeping institutions functioning and keeping financial services going and keeping some infrastructure in place for however long this dysfunctional government lasts. But we've never had anything like that before. We've had government was the government. And now I think it's very much looking like we have the elected government and appointed, and then a shadow government.
Right. We've only got a few minutes left. Talk to me about those Republicans that you know, including maybe some LGBT Republicans. What are they saying, either officially or non-officially? I mean, is the GOP going to save us from 4 full years of Donald Trump? We know we've got a 4-year administration that's Republican.
Yep.
But is it possible that legally we can get Donald Trump out of office before 4 years?
I think the Republicans I know, and I'm not saying by any means is this representative, but the Republicans I know are appalled by what they're seeing with Trump and his administration, and are very concerned that he's not going to make it, that he's not going to last. He's just too mercurial. He may have even done things that would be impeachable offenses. I feel like that's not going to change, though. They're not going to move him out unless they believe this, because this is all going to take Republican leadership. unless they believe that he undermines their chances of keeping their seats in the midterms.
Yeah, that's why ICE is like all of a sudden let's have a, because he
That's
won
right.
by 1%. So
Yep. And look, the numbers don't look good for us with all the gerrymandered districts. The numbers don't look good for the Democrats anyway in the midterms. So the Republicans could hang on for a long time, not holding a president who maybe should be impeached accountable because he's not yet hurting them enough politically. So I think it remains to be seen. I think the next, given that at 35 days we're already talking about maybe this guy should be impeached,
right.
How he makes it 6 months or a year is beyond me.
Yeah, in our last minute and a half, has he, from a legal point of view, and I mean, I know it's all like, well, perception, and some lawyers will say yes, some lawyers will say no, but as a lawyer, has Donald Trump done anything that's impeachable?
I don't think we have enough evidence. I think it's possible, and I might even lean into probable in terms of these contacts with Russia, but I don't think we know yet. I think we need more information and we need more evidence. I don't feel like we have enough to be definitive about that.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about something, well, happy news, but a celebration. What's coming up on May 20th?
So May 20th of this year, we are celebrating at NCLR's anniversary gala that we do every year in May, our 40th anniversary. 1977, I was a junior in high school. Never would have imagined I'd ever need, let alone lead, the National Center for Lesbian Rights. It's going to be an off-the-hook celebration. We're expecting 3,000 people. Palace of the Legion of Honor is where we're hosting the dinner and the after party. You can go to our website and get tickets there. We want to see everybody there. We want to both celebrate 40 years and the arc of how we've bent that arc towards justice for our community, and we want to restore ourselves for the fight ahead.
Got it. Last 15 seconds, any message of hope for people who are watching this who are feeling as downtrodden as I am?
You know, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Do whatever you need to do. Go to a museum, get a good night's sleep, go have a good meal, and then get up tomorrow morning and put your game face on and suit up and get back out on the field, because that's how we're going to fight back when we all do it together.
So keep fighting.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. There's no other option.
Great.
Keep
Thanks.
fighting.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, David.
We've been speaking with Kate Kendell, Executive Director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Be there on May 20th. I will be. Buy your tickets now. More importantly, resist. I'm David Perry. Thanks for watching 10%.